In 1849, the British East India Company officially annexed the Punjab. Administrative surveyors immediately began mapping the region into a rigid grid, installing a system designed for high-efficiency extraction and centralized control. This era left behind two conflicting records. Official British reports celebrated the region as the modernized granary of the Raj, citing massive irrigation and export numbers. Local accounts tell a different story, defined by peasant debt and the erosion of community authority. Analyzing this period requires looking past the idea of a single Indian experience. We have to identify which specific groups the system was built to reward, and which groups it was designed to exploit. The Punjab Commission functioned as a targeted machine, calibrated to extract maximum financial value while maintaining the stability of the imperial frontier. The transition began with the immediate removal of the pre-1849 Sikh aristocracy. The British deposed the Lahore Darbar, stripped its Tagars of their revenue-free land grants, and sent the young Maharaja Dalip Singh into exile in England. The British replaced the traditional order. The agrarian economy shifted from local barter to mandatory cash. Legal authority moved from village customs to a codified system. Traditional panchayats vanished, with power consolidating into a formal hierarchy of British officers reporting to the Governor-General. By establishing this rigid, cash-driven bureaucracy, the British set the rules for every socio-economic outcome that followed. This chart illustrates the new pressure on the average peasant. Previously, taxes were flexible, crop-sharing agreements. The British replaced these with a rigid tax line, a fixed cash assessment that had to be paid on time, regardless of how the harvest actually turned out. To get the cash needed for these taxes, peasants had to stop growing food for local consumption and pivot to cash crops like cotton and wheat for global export. This created a cycle of dependency. During years with low yields or poor global prices, peasants were forced to borrow from urban moneylenders just to cover their tax obligations. While the state secured steady revenue and record exports, the average cultivator's income became increasingly precarious. To maximize revenue, the British constructed the canal colonies. This irrigation project converted millions of arid acres into the subcontinent's most productive agricultural region. These state-funded networks physically transformed the landscape, turning the Punjab into a massive supply source for British industries. By 1900, severe peasant debt prompted the Punjab Alienation of Land Act, barring land transfers to commercial creditors. However, it achieved this by designating specific agricultural tribes, creating a closed system that permanently locked outsiders out of rural land ownership. The government used the canal colonies as a targeted investment to build and enrich a loyal rural elite that would prop up British rule. This courtyard represents the traditional sepidari system. For generations, local artisans provided services to the village in exchange for a guaranteed share of the harvest. This hyper-local economy collapsed when the new currency-centric market opened. Cheap British manufactured textiles and goods flooded the region, undercutting local craftsmen. Since landowners now needed cash for taxes, they stopped supporting local artisans with crop shares. This severed the traditional mutual obligations that had served as the village's economic safety net. The modernization of trade drove mass unemployment for the artisanal class, forcing many into urban migration and landless labor. After 1857, the British turned Punjab into the Raj's sword arm, targeting specific groups like Sikh Jats and Punjabi Muslims as martial races. Recruitment offered a way out of rural poverty. These soldiers received stable wages, high social status, and prime land grants in the new canal colonies. This policy linked a community's economic survival directly to their military utility. Loyalty to the crown became the primary ticket to social mobility. By distributing land and employment based on ethnic and religious lines, the British hardened communal divisions that would define the region's future. This matrix maps the outcomes of the British system to show exactly who benefited from the administration. The upper right quadrant contains the winners, the military classes and the co-opted rural elite, who received land and prestige in exchange for supporting the regime. In the lower left are the traditional artisans and the displaced pre-1849 aristocracy, groups whose economic and social influence were systematically reduced. Urban merchants and bureaucrats fall into the lower right. They dominated the new legal and commercial systems, but were legally blocked from owning rural land or gaining political leverage. Prosperity was strictly gated. It was a zero-sum game dictated by British imperial priorities. The physical output of this era was substantial. The British built thousands of miles of railways and integrated millions of acres into the global economy. However, achieving this required hardening communal lines, inducing widespread peasant debt, and weaponizing social mobility. The prosperity of the model province was the result of a deliberate investment in social engineering. It left behind a deeply fractured society whose rigid divisions would ultimately define the geopolitics of the modern subcontinent.